uh, to kind of like cut back on intense exercise, but there's quite a few. There's quite a few in there that like to, started it back up again or want to start it, particularly running and that kind of thing. So,
okay, cool.
I think I find this interesting. What I would actually love if you just gave a quick intro to yourself, just about.
Absolutely. So I started with endurance sport. Good number of years, about 8 or 9 years ago now, when I was living in London, and my kind of entry into the world of triathlon was not particularly auspicious. I got railroaded into entering a sprint triathlon with a friend of mine who just asked if I'd be up for it, and I said yes. It ended up being a ocean swim in choppy conditions. I was the only person without a wetsuit. They cut the swim distance in half because it was so rough, and I ended up breaststroking my entire way around. I then got onto the bike where I was freezing. Didn't have a very good bike, and then came to life a little bit on the run. And that kind of hard and horrible experience made me fall in love with the sport. And ever since then, I've been, I've kind of dived into the performance side of things. And first, it was coaching myself. So it was reading everything I could get my hands on in order to kind of improve my own performance and learn a bit more. And then I got into the coaching side of things eventually. So I did some qualifications, certifications, and I started coaching with with a group called More Performance. So I've taken people from everything through sprint distance triathlons all the way up to Ironman, and really enjoyed that. But the kind of sport specific side of things was only one part of the puzzle. Lifestyle and nutrition are absolutely key. You've and I'm sure you talk about this quite a lot, Naomi. You've got your stress bucket, your allostatic load, and you can only pour so many things into that in a day. So you're layering work with exercise, with what you're fueling your body with sleep, with how you de-stress. And getting that balance is so important. And that's what really led me to starting Firebrand coaching, and kind of delving more and learning more and becoming qualified in the realm of nutrition as well. Because it isn't just workout planning. It isn't just looking at your performances on the road or on the bike. It's looking at the whole package, and that's really where I've taken things.
Actually, I'd love to touch on that just a bit. So, would you say that first of all you actually got into the physical sport side of it? So, when you first got into it, would you say your diet probably isn't as healthy as it is now?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. My diet's been and still is a work in progress. It's I think, absolutely. So I think back when I first started, it was more sports products, more eating for performance, more carbohydrates, and not really thinking about the health consequences of what I was doing. And now the health consequences and the health outcomes, I'd say, have trumped performance in my list of priorities anyway. So yeah, absolutely.
And I think a lot of people don't think about that when they first start out. But what would be some of the things? So if someone was starting out and they were throwing themselves into training for a marathon or endurance sport or starting to train for an Ironman or something like that, and they actually weren't paying too much particular attention to about the quality of the nutrients, the macronutrient ratios, and they weren't aware of that, what would be some of the changes they'd see? Well, first off, what would be some of the things you think you noticed yourself or colleagues noticed doing it, that there's the difference between, that kind of diet that supports you and doesn't support you?
Absolutely. I think people gravitate towards nutrient poor foods when they start upping the training load quite a lot. And I noticed this so much with especially marathoners and Ironman athletes. People, and there's nothing wrong with, I don't think there's anything wrong with, a nice bowl of oats. I'm quite fond of that. I think that's a nice carbohydrate source. But
Yeah.
when you're primarily fueling on cereals, on breads, on pasta, these are pretty nutrient poor choices. And that can contribute to micronutrient deficiencies. So even though the quantity of food you're eating is pretty vast, and most people, if they're training a couple of hours a day, can pack away a lot of food. I know I can if I'm in peak Ironman training, and so can my athletes. But you can be at risk of of eating a lot, but not actually getting the nutrients your body requires, because you're putting a heavy stress load on yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your body demands a lot when you're exercising a couple of hours a day. GI distress and tummy troubles are another one. Again, that throughput of food, you're not giving your digestive system a break very often if you're training for one of these events. So overall gut problems are something I see quite commonly in athletes as well. I'd say those would be the big two that I'd say crop up quite a lot.
What about recovery? Because one of the questions that I get a lot is about recovering from sport and recovering from endurance exercise or training or marathons. Have you seen the change in diet has a huge impact on actually recovery time and not getting injured and those kind of things?
Absolutely. I find the athletes that tend to cut out fruits and vegetables and nutrient-rich foods tend to get injured more than those that don't. Adequate protein is another one
Huge,
for athletes training a lot. I'd say the general population probably a little too much, and I'd say most athletes probably a little too little, unless they're the sort of person who goes hog wild and supplements with protein shakes every other meal. But high quality protein at that as well.
Okay.
But injury recovery is absolutely huge. If you can find a way to increase your cellular health, I think is a good way of looking at it. If you're providing your body with the kind of coenzymes and the phytonutrients that you get from a nutrient rich diet, all those metabolic processes that go towards cellular repair and recovery are enhanced. And a huge one on that side of things is adequate hydration too. So, and this isn't just pounding lots of water. This is, kind of making sure that the water you're taking in is getting absorbed properly as well, which doesn't always require the use of sports supplements. I think just a pinch of a good quality mineral salt in there and maybe a squeeze of lemon juice. But a lot of athletes are underhydrating, and that can impact recovery quite a lot as well.
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the things with inflammation that will come as soon as someone's not hydrated enough. That inflammation will just spike back up. So that's
Absolutely.
a good one. The salt's a good tip actually for people to do. Put a little pinch in their water. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and that goes for while you're out training as well. On the bike, or if you take a water bottle with you when you're running, a little pinch of salt in there does exactly the same thing as the sports nutrition tablets, which are obviously kind of packed with artificial sweeteners and things of that nature as well, which you kind of want to avoid.
So what would you advise people? Because I know there's a couple of different things that people supplement with. One, there's the salt. So I know the pharmacists sell those sodium tablets. They're really high dose sodium tablets. And another one is things like the gel packets, the kind of what is it? The drinks, the Gatorade kind of drinks. What would you lean towards? How would you actually supplement your electrolytes and those minerals?
So there's a few things here. I think day-to-day electrolyte supplementation, I don't really worry about too much. I think, if you're, again, using a good quality mineral salt, If if you wanted a liquid that's pretty high in electrolytes, coconut water is great. It's a bit sugary, so I would time that around your activity. But honestly, you get plenty of potassium from broccoli and tomatoes. You get calcium from dark leafy greens. You get magnesium from raw cacao or pumpkin seeds. So if you're eating that balanced diet, your electrolytes should take care of themselves.
Should be okay, yeah.
And also the kind of sodium tablets for marathoners and Ironman athletes. I'm not a big believer in that in terms of during the race. I don't think there's an interesting study that shows, I'm sure some people out there would have heard of this, the kind of pickle juice experiment. And it showed when people are cramping, and, everyone talks about cramping associated with electrolytes, which, by the way, there's no evidence for, which is, that's another topic. But a little sip of pickle juice actually made the cramps go away, which is kind of bizarre. So there's obviously a signal there going from the receptors in the mouth, sort of alerting the body that, okay, we've got nutrients on the way, salt's coming, don't worry about it. And the cramps disappeared. But I think in terms of actually absorbing salt you're taking in during a marathon and then that getting into the cells, I think that's a bit of a misnomer and a bit of an ask. So yeah, in terms of electrolytes, I think get your electrolytes in from your regular diet and don't worry about them too much during a race or training situation.
Because what about those runs? What about just I've been on a few kind of fun run types thing. I've done the City to Surf, and it's like every feels like every 10 or 20 minutes there's a table of kind of like the electrolyte cups, and people are walking and chugging those down. I mean, there's no, unless you're severely dehydrated anyway, and it's a super hot day. And you haven't actually drunk anything for the last 24 hours. There's no need in that, really, is there? Would you? No.
No, absolutely. There's a great book by Tim Noakes, who's pretty famous exercise physiologist, and he's big on the nutrition side of things now. He's a big advocate of kind of low carbohydrate fueling, but he wrote a book called Waterlogged, which looked at the rise of hypernatremia in races. So before it was actually Gatorade that is apparently responsible for this. Before they had the big push in terms of getting people to drink beyond thirst and taking loads and loads of electrolyte laden drinks, we saw a massive increase in the instances of people coming down with hypernatremia, which is like overwatering yourself, which can be fatal and can be super, super dangerous. He also looked at performance during the races as well. And the people who did the best were the ones that were ultimately the most dehydrated at the end of a race. So, which is kind of makes sense a little bit, because you're carrying less weight, you're carrying less water weight. And for a running race, you look at the guys at the front of a marathon, they're quite lean. If you pack a litre of water into one of those guys, that's going to make a difference. Exactly. And honestly, I think concerns about, dehydration during even an event like a marathon are pretty overblown. I think as long as you're kind of drinking to thirst, you'll be fine. Yeah.
We're built as humans. We are built for that kind of endurance, walking long distances, carrying things. We're kind of built. We're not made to be drinking water every half an hour.
No, we're not fragile beings, but. Going back to the question you asked about sports nutrition products, there's really I'm in two schools of thought here. So I think for everyday training, I tend to shy away from them. So I think even if you're going on a super long training session or a long ride or a long run, you can do a lot with just real food. So if you wanted to put some calories in a water bottle. A brilliant combination I like is a little bit of maple syrup if the weather's cool, because that's very liquidy, and a little bit of salt. That's pretty tasty and works really well, or a little bit of honey. Okay. And in terms of real food resources, there's a great book called Feed Zone Portables.
So that's Feed Zone Portables?
Feed Zone portables, and that
Okay.
gives loads of recipes for tasty real food things you can wrap up and take out training with you. The most famous are
Awesome.
the rice cakes, so sticky
Oh
rice
yes,
with
yeah, I've seen those.
nuts and
Yeah.
seeds and some berries in them, kind of thing. And those things are great. Banana chips are a great one, as long as they're cooked in a good heat stable oil. So banana chips cooked in coconut oil are a
Yep.
fantastic
Tasty.
option. And
Yeah.
very tasty as well. Some people like taking out, little chunks of roasted sweet potato. That's a good option. And if you're a kind of more fat adapted athlete and you like to fuel with those sorts of things, like nuts or nut butter is a really
Okay.
good one. Justin's do these little sachets, like a gel packet of nut butter you can take out there and use during your training sessions. So that's the everyday training side of things. But some of the races, especially the longer ones, are a pretty unnatural end. And I think to achieve an unnatural end, sometimes you have to use an unnatural means. So I'm not too concerned with using some sports nutrition products for actual races, and a couple of race simulations leading up to them.
What kind of race? What length are we talking about? Are you talking about a marathon or
Yeah,
half
sort of
marathon?
a marathon, even half
Yeah.
marathon. Half marathon, you don't need to take in too much anyway. But sort of marathon or marathon to anything up to kind of an Ironman, is where you want to start thinking about potentially using some engineered fuels.
Yeah. Okay.
From a health perspective, it's a drop in the bucket, really. You're probably doing more damage to yourself actually doing
Doing
the
it.
race.
Yeah.
Let's be pretty clear here. I don't actually. I love triathlon. I coach people for it. I coach people for all kinds of ultra endurance events. Do I think they're necessarily the healthiest thing to do for your body? Not really, but you can look to. There are plenty of good sports nutrition products now, and I think as people become more aware of the health consequences, there's a lot more real food options. So Hammer Nutrition
Yep.
do some really good bars.
Oh
They're
yeah. Yeah, I know them.
primarily organic ingredients, and it's dates, it's nuts, it's seeds, it's that kind of thing. Blue Dinosaur paleo bars, because we all know our caveman ancestors ate things in bar form. But
Love it.
they're tasty and
Yeah,
they're
I've
good,
had those
especially
ones before. Yeah.
especially the Lamington flavor, because cavemen were very fond of Lamingtons.
They love them. Yeah.
They love them, yeah. And then Scratch Labs, Pure Nutrition. Those are some
Yeah.
good sources of drink mix. So I think for the convenience factor for race day, and if you've got performance goals as well, again, it all comes down to your goals. Hey, if you just want to get around the race, you just want to have fun, you're not bothered about going particularly fast, you're just out there for the day, by all means, take some nuts and seeds and sweet potatoes. But if you're an every second counts kind of athlete and you really want to go hard at a PB, then don't be afraid to have a little bit of drink mix. It's probably the least of your worries if you're spending 13 hours exercising that day.
Exactly, yeah. So that's for a race. And then so what about actually prior to fueling yourself prior? So I know that a lot of people will load up on pasta or that kind of food, before race day or before
Sure.
the endurance day. So what is that something you would recommend, or do you go about it a different way?
Yeah, not really, to be honest. I think there's two things to consider. Most people, the few days or the week before an event, they're in taper mode anyway, so they're bringing down their exercise volume quite substantially. So you're not burning
Okay.
you're
Yeah.
not burning through the same amount of the same amount of calories, or you're not burning through your glycogen stores. So there's not as much a need to replenish them. There's a couple of things I like to do. I do like to top off, make sure your carbohydrate stores are topped off. And again, this is more important for longer events where you're going to be kind of scraping the barrel of your carbohydrate stores. And, you're also going to have to be taking on, exogenous external carbohydrates during the race
Yeah.
as well.
Okay.
If you're running a 5K, don't even worry about it. Even a 10K race,
You
you're
wouldn't
going
need
to
to
have
worry. Okay.
you wouldn't need to worry about fueling anyway. You're going to have plenty in your system, so I wouldn't freak out about that at all. I would cut down on the, this is the one time I tell people not to eat their greens, is I cut down on the fiber like a day or so before the race, especially for longer races.
Oh, why is that? Just bowel mo
Yeah, basically, you don't want to have to go to the bathroom if you can help it
Ah,
during an Ironman
interesting.
or a
Okay.
marathon. So yeah,
Okay.
I get people to cut down on kind of fibrous things a day or so before. And then there's a couple of hacks I really like to use for performance. So one of them is caffeine fasting.
Mm-hmm.
So caffeine has been absolutely proven in many studies to be an ergogenic aid. So it enhances endurance performance.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that the World Anti-Doping Authority actually banned it. It was on the banned list for a number of years until they realized this was silly and people really like to drink coffee. So they took it off.
Too many
Um,
people getting banned.
oh, yeah, absolutely. So I only had a latte. Yeah, no. So if you're a habitual caffeine drinker, though, the effect on your performance from having a coffee or having a caffeinated sports product is substantially lowered. But by cutting out the caffeine for sort of 5 to 7 days before the event, you can reset the adenosine receptors in your brain. And when you have that coffee on race morning or where you have that caffeinated sports product, you get that boost and you get that
Right. So you would have
ergogenic.
it on the morning of, just before some kind of.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and also that helps going back to, I don't want to turn this all into kind of like bathroom talk as well. Having the caffeine, the morning of as well,
Yeah.
make sure you
Yeah.
clear yourself out before you head out for the race.
Ah, okay.
And then for an Ironman, I would have some caffeine in my kind of sports nutrition as well. So that's one thing I like to do. I also like to load up on beetroot juice. So there's a lot, you might have heard about this, but there's a lot of evidence and a lot of studies focused on the nitrates in beetroot juice increasing the oxygen carrying capacity to your muscles and your cells, and that can enhance performance quite profoundly as well. So I
Ah.
sort of have about 200 milliliters of beetroot juice every day for about 5 days
So
leading
just
up.
leading up every day.
Just leading up every day, just for sort of 5 to 7 days beforehand,
That
and
would
then
make
I'll
your
have.
pee quite purple. Yeah.
Yep. You get purple pee,
Don't
and
freak out.
yeah, if you have some and then kind of forget you have it, and you go to the bathroom and you're still half asleep in the morning, it can be a little bit
Be mad.
startling. But
Yeah.
the beetroot juice is another good one that I like to do leading up to the race too. But in terms of carbohydrate loading, no, I just keep yourself topped off. And then, the morning of the race, again, it depends on the duration of the race and also what you're comfortable with as well. This is one thing I do with a lot of my athletes is just make sure anything that we're going to do on race day, we test out. So breakfast, we test having that before long runs and long rides,
Okay.
intensity, just to make sure that it sits well in the stomach, they're comfortable with it, because there's no right or wrong answer. If you look at the diets of professional athletes, and if I look at the diets of the people I coach, they're so varied. I've got I've got somebody who's racing Ironman Louisville tomorrow. He's after a Kona qualification spot. He's really going for it. He's having a burger for dinner tonight because that sits well in his stomach. He's comfortable with it.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't necessarily be my recommendation, but it works for him, and it psychologically that can be very, very powerful. So yeah.
Yeah, it's actually probably got quite a good balance because you've got that little bit of carb and then the protein and the fat as well. It's got quite a good balance for
Sure.
for the day before. Do you stay
Yeah.
away from things like gluten, wheat grains, and those kind of things though? Would you advise your clients? Yeah.
Yeah, for the most
Yeah.
part, absolutely. I think the jury's still out on wheat and gluten, but I'd say with anything, it's just test it. Cut it out, see how you feel. One of the clients I'm doing some nutrition coaching with at the moment, he was eating quite a lot of bread, every day. He does triathlons as well, but we're just sort of looking at it from a health perspective.
Right.
He cut out all bread as an experiment, all gluten for 2 weeks. Stopped snoring. Gets to sleep a lot easier. And I think that was an inflammation thing, potentially.
Yes.
So his partner is very, very happy about that. So
Wow. How cool is
testing,
that? Yeah.
yeah, very, Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. So talking about diet, actually, I just wanted to touch on being fat adapted. So a lot of
Mm.
people rely on the carbohydrates, particularly running. And I even know a lot of my clients, and I know a lot of the women who might run in the morning, they actually end up eating more carbs. Is there, is there a way to do it where you become fat adapted and that there's kind of a ketogenic diet? Is that, it's coming out now. There's more people talking about it,
Mm.
but have you seen that be successful?
Yeah, there's two things there. The fat adaptation and a full-blown ketogenic diet, I think, are kind of two very, while they're on the same
Yes.
spectrum, but I'd say everyone can become more fat adapted. I think that's a very easy win for a lot of people. This generally comes about through a mix of, I'd say, some fasted training in the mornings you can do. So, and it comes down to what the goal of the training session is. I'd make the goal of the training session to become more metabolically efficient, to become more fat adapted, which means you're exercising at pretty moderate to low intensities. The duration isn't super long, but it's fairly decent. And you can doing that on an empty stomach actually kind of kickstarts the use of
Right.
keto.
Yep.
But if your goal for the workout for the day is performance, if you're doing some really high intensity work, if you're going on a super long session, if you're doing a lot of work which you're going to be tapping into your glycogen stores, doing that in a fasted state isn't necessarily the best idea. So it depends on whether your goal is metabolic efficiency or whether your goal is performance for that particular session.
Okay.
And also carbohydrate timing, I've found, helps quite a lot with fat adaptation. The thing I have most of my athletes do is focus on getting most of their carbohydrates kind of pre, during, and after their workouts if they're looking for general fat adaptation and metabolic efficiency. So you're more insulin sensitive when you've performed a workout, so you can get away with some sweet potato or some rice or some oats or something like that, but post workout to help with refueling, and you're more likely to shuttle that back into glycogen stores than convert it to stored body fat. I would then, when you're not exercising, I have people focus on lower carbohydrate, higher fat, moderate protein meals. So that would be, for instance, a typical day for somebody maybe is they get up and they're performing a pretty high intensity session. If they're a man, they can do that fasted. I think men deal with fasted training and deal with fasting in general a little better than a lot of women. Women tend not to handle it as well. Some hormonal reasons which you can talk to way better than I can.
Yeah, it's true, absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so after that they might have a bowl of porridge with some nuts and seeds. Then for lunch it would be some oily fish, so some good quality, some mackerel, maybe with some avocado, nice olive oil on there. Big bowl of salad, but not necessarily the carbohydrates. And then dinner could be, roasted vegetables, again high quality protein source, maybe some grass-fed beef. Maybe some eggs, but I think getting the carbohydrates around the workout and then focusing on a higher fat, lower carbohydrate diet at other times is the best way to become more metabolically efficient.
So, I mean, one of the things that I notice from clients and also women that work out is that, and actually a few men have said it to me, and maybe this is just about them becoming fat adapted. It's that not being able to exercise in the morning on an empty stomach because they feel nauseous. So that must be that, once they get fat adapted, you're able to you don't have to eat first thing in the morning. Would you say that's part of it? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's a key signal. If you're waking up ravenous, then you're probably and if you're waking up during the night and you're hungry when you wake up, your body is primarily running on glucose. It wants those exogenous glucose sources. If you wake up, you're not hungry, you're happy to go out training or nothing, that's a good sign that you're fairly fat adapted.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
And I on the ketogenic diet side of things, that's quite extreme. And most people don't live lives that I think really lend themselves to being in ketosis a lot of the time. You're looking at, an 80% plus percentage of fats in your diet as opposed to carbohydrates and proteins, which is pretty restrictive, and I'd ask yourself why you were doing it. What is the end goal of a ketogenic diet for you? If it's performance, I mean, there are athletes that out there like Zach Bitter. Mm-hmm. He's an American runner. He's got the 100-mile American record, and I think he's got the 24-hour track record. So he ran around a track for 24 hours, which is a bit beyond me in terms of willpower. But he's got the record. He's a very fast athlete.
He ran around a what in 24 hours?
A running track, like a 400-meter track. Just loops and loops and loops.
Wow.
He's got the record. Yeah,
wow.
So very fast guy, and also low carbohydrate, ketogenic diet advocate, and a very high performer. But for the most part, there isn't really any good evidence that a ketogenic diet is beneficial for performance. I'd say the longer the race goes, the probably the more beneficial it is, because you're just putting less stress on your body and you've got less throughput of calories. So I found, personally for me as well, when I'm racing an Ironman or an ultra marathon or a long distance bike race, mm-hmm. because I'm quite fat adapted, I need to take in less calories during that event, so I have less chance of GI distress. Because one of the biggest things for long distance, endurance events is the stress you put on your gut, and you're shunting blood elsewhere in your body. It's not all going to the stomach to help you digest things. You're taking resources away from your GI tract when you're stressing your body elsewhere. So people come a cropper like that. So I think becoming fat adapted is really good for that. But I think a full-blown ketogenic diet,
not necessary.
Not
okay.
necessary. And I think people can do it. I think it's an interesting experiment, but I think it's a bit much for most people. Okay. And the effects on things like thyroid can be quite pronounced as well. So there's a great health and fitness blogger and podcaster called Ben Greenfield, and he did an experiment where he completed a couple of Ironman races on full ketogenic diet. Did quite well, he was very careful to supplement properly and all the rest of it. But he afterwards, he was testing his bloods, and he found he gave himself some pretty significant thyroid problems, and this is quite a common thing that pops up as well. So there's no metabolic free lunch with this sort of stuff. So
all right, what about vegans and vegetarians? How would they? What's the best way for them to fuel themselves?
Absolutely. There's plenty of high-performing vegan and vegetarian athletes out there. Meat is not essential for performance in sports. I myself did 8 months on a vegan diet, and then I had my best Ironman race ever, and I was pretty lean from it as well. So you can definitely do it. A couple of things that I would consider with a vegan and vegetarian diet. I'd say we mentioned protein before. Mm-hmm. For vegetarians, it's not as much of a problem. You can go to eggs, and you can go to dairy, which helps with total protein consumption. Vegans are more reliant on beans and legumes. And if you are doing a lot of beans and legumes, again, there's a little bit of an issue with potential anti-nutrients, so the oxalates and phytates in beans and legumes. So one of the biggest tips I would have for vegan athletes wanting to, make sure they get adequate protein is to soak and sprout their beans and legumes, because that cuts down on the anti-nutrients almost entirely. Mm-hmm. And also it makes a lot of the nutrients in them a lot more bioavailable. So I think there's a great video on nutritionfacts.org, which is Dr. McGregor's website, and he did a comparison of nutrient profiles from soaked and non-soaked beans and legumes, and the nutrient, like levels of vitamins and minerals just went off the charts, which is great. The other thing for vegan athletes, especially women as well, is iron deficiency, and this is really common in athlete populations in general. The availability of iron in a vegetarian diet. So there's two types of iron, taking a step back. There's heme iron from animal products, and there's non-heme iron, which comes from vegetables. Heme iron's pretty readily absorbed by the body and pretty bioavailable. Non-heme iron, a little bit less so. That doesn't mean you can't get plenty of iron from plants. Spinach is a typical example that everyone likes to throw out there. Things you can do, vitamin C really enhances the absorption of non-heme iron from plant sources. So think of squeezing a bit of lemon juice on your salad. That can really help. Also, one thing that people fall down the rabbit hole of doing sometimes is blunting the absorption of it through tannins, so tea and coffee. So if you're having a cup of tea after you're having your salad at lunchtime at work, you could be actually impairing your ability to absorb the iron from that. So I'd be careful there. Not a huge fan of iron supplementation for a few reasons, if you can avoid it. But those would be my top tips for vegan and vegetarian athletes.
Yeah, I think that's useful. Just get that digestion working, get it absorbing. Yeah.
Other than that, there's no reason in the world why you can't, rock on and do everything you need to.
Do the same, yeah. So maybe just would you advise supplementing with any protein products if you were vegan, or you think no need if you're?
Not really. If you're getting plenty of beans and legumes, I mean, there's some great vegan proteins. So you can get sprouted brown rice and pea proteins. I really like my go-to protein powder, which I find is really easy on the stomach and doesn't give you any gas, is hemp protein. And hemp is a really good kind of its amino acid profile is outstanding. So hemp protein is fantastic. And you can get good unsweetened, just raw ground hemp protein, and you can add that to a smoothie or add that to your porridge, and that's a really good source. B12 is a no-brainer, especially for vegan athletes. If you're there aren't really any plant sources of B12, so any vegan athlete, especially an athlete who's training a lot, I would recommend B12 supplementation. And getting tested regularly as well.
Good, yeah.
But I'd say as long as you're mindful of getting enough protein from real food sources, there's not a requirement to go out there and use protein powders.
It's interesting that you just mentioned B12, and actually I'm just interested in terms of testing and in terms of the usual bloods like iron and B12. Have you seen, working with clients or even working with yourself, have you seen those levels, if you weren't to supplement or take anything with doing endurance training, have you actually seen those levels drop quite significantly after a big event?
Good question. Most people don't go and get tested after the big event, and this is most people kind of switch off from from things like that straight afterwards. It would be interesting, though. It would be interesting. Yeah. I'd like to see that. Very good. I don't know the answer to that, but I would. I'd assume there would be a bit of depletion,
drop off. Yeah.
I think with most things like that, the effect on anything like that would be fairly short term from a large endurance event. I think the body bounces back with relatively quickly.
Now, talking about the body bouncing back, a lot of issues, whether you're sort of a new to running or you're new to endurance training, injury, recurrent injury, stressing the body is a big issue. Is that to do with the pace of training? Is it to do more with diet? What's happening there? Is it just people not doing it properly?
It's a bit of both. The most frequent cause of injury I see is from A, overuse, and B, ramping up the training too quickly. So you want to aim for a nice, slow, steady progression in your training load and training volume. So that could be intensity or that could be duration. I think going from not running at all to 50 kilometers a week is a mistake, and that's going to that's going to lead to some injury issues. And also, the more volume you do with poor biomechanics, with poor fitting shoes, without adequate nutrition, that's the real killer. So I'd say ramp up the load slowly. I'd say go get a proper gait analysis and get put in some running shoes that are suitable for you, especially with newer athletes or people who haven't run typically. They'll go to the store and they'll buy whichever running shoe was on special and they like the color of, which is fine if you're not doing much. But if you buy a stability shoe and you've got pronation or supination issues, you could be compounding a biomechanical inefficiency, and every step you're taking, you're increasing your risk of injury. So getting put in the right type of running shoes for you is super important. And then I'd get somebody, if you're serious about it and you're going to be doing a lot of run volume and a lot of kilometers, I'd get somebody to look at your gait and your.
Who would do that?
Run.
Where would you get that done?
There's a great run coach in Sydney called Sally Lynch. She does a lot of work. She's a pose method practitioner. She's worked with a lot of athletes who I've referred to her. But I mean, you can Google kind of the pose method is just kind of one. There's chi running is another kind of popular one. I mean, the basics are. You don't really want it. It's pretty widely acknowledged now that heel striking is a kind of common cause of injury. You're putting a lot of shock and a lot of force through your body. So if you're running on a surface and you hit with your heel there, you're just sending a shock wave up. Yeah. Whereas if you're landing under yourself, with can you see this? Yeah.
Can see it, yeah.
Yeah, good. So if you're landing under yourself, you're using the shock absorption capabilities of your knees and your ankles and whatnot.
So it's the whole stride in what you're doing. There's a whole that whole science to it. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's you can do a little bit by getting a friend to film you and having a look, but there's no substitute for just getting somebody on a one-off session to just look at your gait and giving you some drills and advice on how to run with good form.
Okay, no, that's good. And then in terms of recovery, I mean, what's the best way if you're? There's two things happening here. Some people might just be going out every day and doing a 5 kilometer run in the morning. Others might be training. I mean, what's the best way to actually help your body recover? Other than is it just having a day off of exercise and doing nothing, or are there other things that can assist?
Oh, absolutely. So apart from eating a good nutrient-rich diet, which I think is an adequate hydration, which we've spoken about, which is, I think, priority number one. Also, absolutely right, taking breaks and letting yourself deload. People, I think everyone's aware that you don't get fit or you don't improve by actually doing the exercise. You improve and you get fit during the recovery phase. So if you're not allowing yourself adequate recovery, you're just breaking yourself down and then breaking yourself down again. So this is quite common in type A athletes, especially ones training for a triathlon with 3 sports. They're loading exercise on top of exercise. And inflammation is good, to a certain extent. Everyone thinks inflammation and immediately recoils in horror that you might actually want some. But that short-term acute inflammation is great for the body. It's getting things to where they need to go, and it's helping the recovery process. The problem comes when you've got acute inflammation from, not allowing yourself adequate recovery, and you're just going from inflamed to inflamed to inflamed. So recovery time is great. And then there's obviously stretching. Foam rolling is a great one. So getting a nice hard foam roller and making sure you're kind of ironing out any niggles or any potential pain points on the body. or just a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball or not a tennis ball, like a cricket ball, any kind of hard ball that you can get in there and kind of roll around and break up the fascia a little bit is really good for recovery. Magnesium baths are really good.
Yeah, Epsom salt, beautiful.
Epsom salt's really cheap, nice, relaxing way to recover. That's great. Those would be my biggies, and of course, I mean, we can't go a discussion without touching on this. Sleep. Please sleep.
Yeah, sleep's the best. Yeah.
Sleep is so important for so many things, but exercise recovery is definitely one of them. I think if you're shortchanging yourself with your sleep quality, so sleep hygiene, dark, cool room, noise free, having a good sleep routine, some meditation, not looking at the screens and blue light, and just making sure your sleep quality is as good as it can be. Super important.
No, that's a really good tip. I think everyone, even if you're not running, needs that's the best recovery mentally, physically. Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I did get a question about a lady that runs. She's started running in the morning, and she said that she wakes up and the next day she always gets these aches in her ankles. Where would be would that be? Do you think that would be something to do with the shoes, or would that be the first place you'd look?
Yeah, I'd kind of refer back to the last question with that one. I'd want to know whether she was a new runner. It could just be, if she's brand new to running, it could literally just be that she's not used to working those muscles and they're just stiff and sore because she's not used to doing it. If she's an experienced runner and she's been running for years, I would look at addressing those causal factors. So the biomechanics, the running form, I'd say are the kind of two, because you could give recommendations in terms of things to reduce the pain or reduce the inflammation. So you could look at, supplementing with turmeric and ginger and things of that nature. And you could look at all kinds of stretches and foam rolling, but those are kind of band-aids on something which shouldn't be occurring really. Because if you're running, sensible distance, sensible pace, with good form, you shouldn't really have stiff ankles and feet in the morning. So I would address those issues first and see if you can get to the root cause.
Okay, no, that's great. One other thing that I've noticed, and actually a lot of the members of the program that I run, the Breakthrough program, when they do too much running or even intense exercise in the morning, these are women we're talking about, when they do too much intense exercise in the morning, a couple of things are happening. Afterwards, for the rest of the day, obviously it's something happening with the hormone levels, but I don't know if there's something nutritionally they can do, or they should exercise at a different time of the day. They get super, super hungry the whole day. And so they're running in the morning, so they just want to eat the rest of the day. And if they're trying to lose weight, then it's just not helping. So what have you got any tips for those ladies, what they could do?
Yeah. Anecdotally, from the athletes I coach, and also from an energy substrate utilization point of view, and I know this when I do it too, the biggest impact on hunger cravings after a workout comes from that gray zone training in the middle. Now, what I mean by that is, if you're exercising at a really kind of moderate aerobic pace, you're typically tapping into quite a lot of fat as an energy substrate. So you're not dipping into your glycogen stores. People don't tend to get very hungry here. People don't tend to get very hungry on the super, like if you're using your phosphocreatine energy system to do sprints, for instance. So like, you're doing 20-second sprints with 2 minutes recovery in between, because you're not burning glucose, you're not burning glycogen here either. Where people tend to get hungry is in the middle, where they're using that glycolytic pathway. So they're going at that kind of like uncomfortably uncomfortable pace. It's above their aerobic threshold, and they're tapping into stored glucose and burning glycogen for fuel. that has a big impact on hunger cravings. So
Ah,
I would look at polarizing their training a little bit, and it's particularly craving for carbohydrates as well. So
yes.
there's a couple of things there. I'd say polarizing the training a little bit. So, going between nice, slow, I think I mentioned this kind of 80-20. I'm not sure, maybe I did, the 80-20 rule. And again, professional athletes tend to train at the two ends of the spectrum, 80% at like what would be for them quite kind of easy, really easy, and 20% really, really hard, and not so much in the middle. That can have a really good effect. Another couple of things are eating beforehand if you're not doing so already.
Right.
I think is important. Also, eating the right type of things afterwards, because that hunger all day means your body's not gotten something it needs after you've worked out.
Yeah.
So potentially looking at upping your protein intake a little bit post workout, and experimenting with different types of fuel after your workout. And I found amino acids as well, essential amino acids. So just a plain essential amino acids powder. You can get a big kilogram bag of it
That's a
pretty
good idea.
cheap
Yes.
from somewhere like Bulk Nutrients or something like that. Just a scoop of that in your water throughout the day can really help cut down on those hunger cravings. But I'd say, yeah, the main driver for that hunger tends to come from that kind of gray zone training. So it'd be interesting to see if the questioners who asked that was
What kind of
where
training?
they
So you'd say doing training like, and I know doing the sprint training is good for growth hormones. So it's particularly good for women. So actually, if you're doing that kind of training, you're less likely to have
yeah,
the cravings through the day. So you're talking about, so
absolutely.
how long? So are we talking about sort of the cravings are caused by doing like a 5 or 10 kilometer run at a quite a
Yeah,
fast pace?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if
Right,
you're exercising for say an hour at that kind of moderate,
right.
in the middle gray zone pace, that usually ramps up the hunger for most
I
people.
know that from people that do. So I get a lot of comments